In the blistering summer of 1975, the small town of Willow Creek, Nebraska, was a patchwork of cornfields and dusty roads where the horizon stretched endlessly, but dreams of city life felt like chasing stars. I was Jane Harper, a woman whose life had been defined by devotion, sacrifice, and a quiet hope that loyalty would someday be rewarded. For 40 years, I poured my heart into serving my husband, Brian Walsh, a man whose charm once made my young heart flutter. I woke before dawn to cook his favorite breakfasts, fluffy pancakes, crisp bacon, and coffee brewed just as he liked. I mended his work shirts, ironed his jeans, and never let him lift a finger to wash his dishes or pour his bath water. My hands grew calloused from scrubbing floors and tending to our modest home, but I did it all with a smile, believing it was my duty as his wife. Beyond Brian, I cared for his mother, Eleanor Walsh, a sharp-tongued woman who uses a wheelchair after a stroke. For 8 years, I fed her, bathed her, and cleaned her messes, even as she sneered at me as a small-town hick who'd somehow ensnared her precious son. Her words stung, but I swallowed them, thinking my care would earn her respect. I worked grueling shifts at Rosie's Diner, the only eatery in Willow Creek, saving every penny to send our son Michael to college. I dreamed he'd become a doctor or a lawyer, someone who'd lift us out of this hardscrabble life. But when Brian died of a heart attack in 2015, his hand clutched a faded photo of his high school sweetheart, Emma Lane. Not a picture of me, his wife of 4 decades, but Emma, the woman he'd never stopped loving. The betrayal cut deeper when Michael, now a grown man, turned on me. Influenced by Eleanor's venom and Brian's whispered tales of his true love stolen by me, Michael called me a scheming woman who'd ruined his childhood and destroyed his father's happiness. "You're nothing but a manipulative nobody," he spat, his words echoing his grandmother's disdain. When I fell ill, my body weakened from years of overwork. Michael took my phone, locked me in a rundown trailer on the outskirts of town, and left me to starve. As my strength faded, the cold seeped into my bones and my vision blurred. A strange warmth enveloped me. Soft yet clear voice whispered, "You deserve another chance, Jane. Rewrite your story." I don't know if it was God, fate, or some cosmic force, but that voice was my salvation. It wasn't just a second chance, it was a call to break free from the chains of my past. As I lay there, my life slipping away, I felt a surge of clarity. I'd given everything to a man who never loved me, a mother-in-law who despised me, and a son who betrayed me. But I wasn't done yet. The warmth grew, wrapping me in light, and I knew I was being given a gift, a chance to live again, to choose differently. At that moment, I thought of Willow Creek's community, which was always watching and judging. They'd seen my struggles, whispered about my sacrifices, yet never lifted a hand to help. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever felt trapped by loyalty or betrayed by those you loved, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share your story in the comments below, hit that like button to spread this tale of redemption, and subscribe to our channel for more journeys of second chances. Your support keeps these stories alive, just like my rebirth gave me a new life. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in that trailer. I was standing in a cornfield, the Nebraska sun beating down my body, young and aching with hunger, but alive. It was 1975 again, the day I'd once saved Brian from a heart attack while he worked on Emma's family farm. The air smelled of earth and sweat, and the weight of 40 years of pain pressed against my heart. I looked at my hands, smooth, unscarred, not yet worn by decades of service. This was my moment, my chance to rewrite my story. I wouldn't waste it on Brian Walsh. In my past life, I'd been a fool chasing a man who saw me as a servant, not a partner. I'd ignored the quiet strength of others like Lucas Reed, the foreman of our farming co-op. Lucas was a man of few words, his face weathered by the sun, his eyes dark and intense. I'd once been terrified of him, mistaking his stern gaze for judgment. But years later, when I was dying in that trailer, it was Lucas who'd found me, paid for my hospital bills, and sat by my bedside, his rough hands gentle as he adjusted my blanket. He'd built a successful trucking business in Omaha, but never married, carrying a torch for me that I'd been too blind to see. Now, standing in that cornfield, I knew Lucas was the man I should choose, not Brian, not the man who'd broken me. The townsfolk were gathering their voices, a low hum, as they noticed Brian collapsed in the dirt. "Jane, do something," someone shouted. In my past life, I'd rushed to his side, giving him CPR, only to be shamed into marrying him when rumors spread that I'd thrown myself at him. This time I stood still, my heart pounding with resolve. I wouldn't save him. I wouldn't repeat my mistakes. Instead, I turned my eyes, searching for Lucas. He stood at the edge of the field, his broad shoulders squared, watching me with that same intense gaze I'd once feared. But now I saw something else in his eyes, hope, maybe even longing. I took a deep breath, the Nebraska air filling my lungs, and walked toward him. The crowd's whispers faded as my boots crunched against the dry earth. My past life flashed before me, 40 years of cooking, cleaning, and crying alone. I wouldn't live that way again. Standing before Lucas, I met his gaze, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "Lucas Reed," I said, loud enough for the crowd to hear, "will you marry me?" The field went silent, the air thick with shock. Lucas's dark eyes widened, his stern face softening for a fleeting moment. I'd just thrown my old life to the wind, and in that moment I felt alive, truly alive for the first time in decades. This was my rebirth, my chance to choose love, not duty, and I was choosing Lucas. The Nebraska sun hung high over Willow Creek's endless cornfields, its heat pressing against my skin as I stood frozen. Lucas Reed's dark eyes locked on mine. I'd just asked him to marry me, my voice cutting through the stunned silence of the townsfolk gathered around Brian Walsh's collapsed form. My heart raced not from fear, but from the thrill of defying my past life's mistakes. In 1975, Jane Harper, was 22, again my body frail from years of skipping meals to feed Brian, but my spirit burning with newfound resolve. The cosmic voice that had whispered, "You deserve another chance." As I died in that trailer still echoed in my mind, a reminder that this rebirth wasn't just a second life. It was a mandate to choose differently, to reclaim the years I'd lost to a man who never loved me. Brian lay in the dirt, his face pale, his chest still. In my past life, I'd saved him from this heart attack, my hands trembling as I performed CPR under the townsfolk's watchful eyes. They'd called me shameless, accused me of throwing myself at him, and pressured me into a marriage that became my prison. Emma Lane, Brian's high school sweetheart, had lurked in the shadows, letting the crowd push me into saving him only to weep about their stolen love. That marriage cost me everything, my dreams, my mother, my dignity. Now reborn with the memories of 40 years of betrayal, I wouldn't touch him. Let him face the consequences of his choices. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. "Jane, why aren't you helping him?" called Mrs. Thompson, the town's nosiest busybody. "You're always trailing after Brian." Her words stung, echoing the gossip that had trapped me in my past life. I glanced at Brian's crumpled form, then back at Lucas, who stood at the field's edge, his muscular frame tense, his hands clenched. Lucas was a mystery to most of Willow Creek, a city boy from Omaha, who'd come to the co-op 5 years ago after his parents died in a car accident. He'd taken on the foreman role with a quiet intensity, his stern face and rare words making him seem unapproachable. In my past life, I'd avoided him, scared off by his piercing gaze and the rumors that he was too serious, too driven. But I'd learned the truth when I was dying. Lucas had loved me silently, watching over me during fieldwork, slipping extra rations into my basket when he thought I wasn't looking. When my son abandoned me, it was Lucas who found me, paid for my care, and sat by my bedside, his rough voice soft as he promised I'd be okay. Now I saw him differently. His dark, weathered skin glistened with sweat, and his broad shoulders were a testament to years of hard labor. But his eyes, deep, steady, and filled with unspoken care, drew me in. I'd wasted 40 years on Brian, a man who saw me as a servant. Lucas saw me as a person. My proposal to him wasn't just a whim, but a declaration of my new life where I'd choose love over duty, strength over submission. The crowd's whispers turned to gasps as I stepped closer to Lucas. "Jane, what are you doing?" someone shouted. I ignored them, my focus on Lucas's face. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I feared he'd turn away, overwhelmed by my boldness. In 1975, Willow Creek was a place where women didn't propose, where tradition dictated we wait demure and silent for a man to choose us. But I wasn't that Jane anymore. The cosmic force that had brought me back, whether God, fate, or something else, had given me this moment to rewrite my story. I wouldn't wait for permission. "Lucas," I said again, softer now, my voice trembling but clear. "I know this is sudden. I know I'm just a diner waitress with no fancy education or city polish. But I've spent my life serving the wrong person, and I'm done with that. I see you, your kindness, your strength. I want a life with you if you'll have me." My cheeks burned, but I held his gaze, refusing to look away. Lucas blinked, his stern expression cracking. A flicker of surprise, then warmth, crossed his face. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, a commotion erupted behind me. "Someone help Brian!" Mrs. Thompson shrieked. "He's dying!" The crowd surged toward Brian, their voices a chaotic blend of panic and judgment. I turned my heart cold. This moment had defined me in my past life, saving Brian, tying myself to him forever. Now I'd let someone else bear that burden. Emma was with him when he collapsed. I roared, pointing to where Emma Lane stood half hidden behind a stack of hay bales. Her rosy cheeks and sturdy frame contrasted with my gaunt, hollow-eyed face. For years, I'd scrimped on my own meals to bring Brian extra food, only to learn later that he'd given it all to Emma, his true love. The crowd's eyes followed my gesture, and Emma's face flushed crimson. I I can't," she stammered, waving her hands. "I'm not strong enough," I said. "You're stronger than me," my voice steady despite the hunger gnawing at my stomach. "You've been eating the meals I brought for Brian, right?" A murmur rippled through the crowd, heads turning to Emma. Her eyes widened, caught off guard. She'd played the victim in my past life, letting me take the fall. Now I'd make her face the consequences. "Emma, please do it," called Tom Jenkins, a gruff farmer. "You were with him all morning." The crowd pressed in their voices, rising. Emma's protests grew weaker, her face a mask of panic. Finally, she knelt beside Brian, her hands shaking as she began CPR. I watched, my heart pounding, not with guilt, but with triumph. This was my first step toward freedom, letting Emma take the role she'd manipulated me into in my past life. As Emma worked, I turned back to Lucas. He hadn't moved, his eyes still on me, a mix of awe and uncertainty in his gaze. "Jane," he said, his voice low and rough, "you're serious about this?" I nodded, my throat tight, more serious than I've ever been. He scratched the back of his neck, a rare, nervous gesture, then gave a slight nod. "We'll talk later," he said, his tone gruff but not unkind. "You've got my attention." The crowd's focus shifted as Brian coughed, his eyes fluttering open. Emma sat back, breathless, her face red with embarrassment. I stepped away, my boots sinking into the soft earth, my heart lighter than in decades. Lucas's words echoed in my mind. "We'll talk later." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. For the first time, I felt the weight of my past life lifting, replaced by the possibility of a future I could choose. Brian's fate, Emma's schemes, the town's gossip, none mattered anymore. I was Jane Harper, reborn, and I was done being anyone's servant. The Nebraska sun beat down on the Willow Creek cornfield, its golden rose stretching endlessly under a cloudless sky. It was the summer of 1975, and I, Jane Harper, stood at the edge of a pivotal moment, my heart pounding with the weight of my reborn life. Moments ago, I'd shocked the townsfolk by proposing to Lucas Reed, the stoic foreman of our farming co-op, right in front of Brian Walsh's collapsed form. Brian, the man I'd served for 40 years in my past life, lay unconscious in the dirt, his heart failing after overexerting himself on Emma Lane's family farm. In my previous life, I'd saved him, giving CPR under the watchful eyes of Willow Creek's gossip-hungry residents, only to be shamed into a marriage that became my undoing. This time, reborn with the memories of those decades of betrayal, I'd walked away, refusing to repeat my mistakes. The cosmic voice that had granted me this second chance. "You deserve another chance," Jane still echoed in my mind, urging me to forge a new path. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, their voices a mix of confusion and accusation. "Jane, why aren't you helping him?" shouted Mrs. Thompson, her shrill tone cutting through the humid air. She was the town's self-appointed moral arbiter, always quick to judge. "You're always chasing after Brian. What's wrong with you?" Her words were a knife slicing open old wounds from my past life. For years, I'd been Willow Creek's dutiful daughter, working grueling shifts at Rosie's diner to feed Brian, scrimping on my meals to bring him extra portions. The town had watched, whispered, and judged, calling me desperate for trailing after a man who never loved me. They'd pushed me into marrying him after I saved his life, branding me shameless for throwing myself at him. Now their eyes bored into me, expecting the same Jane Meek compliant, ready to sacrifice herself. I stood my ground, my frail frame trembling from hunger, but my resolve ironclad. In my past life, I'd let their gossip define me, chaining me to Brian and his mother Eleanor, who despised me as a small-town hick. I'd lost my mother Mary to that life, leaving her alone in Willow Creek, while I followed Brian to Omaha, only visiting her 4 times in 40 years. My son Michael, raised on Brian's lies about his stolen love, with Emma, had turned against me, locking me in a trailer to die. Jane was gone. This Jane reborn would not bend to their expectations. I glanced at Lucas, who stood a few yards away, his dark eyes watching me with a mix of curiosity and something more profound hope, perhaps. His quiet strength anchored me, a reminder of the life I could choose. Turning back to the crowd, I raised my voice, feigning panic to mask my calculation. "Someone help, Brian's dying," I shouted, my voice cracking just enough to sell the act. "I'm too weak to give CPR, look at me." I held out my trembling hands, my thin arms and hollow cheeks, a stark contrast to the robust health of the townsfolk. Years of giving my food to Brian had left me malnourished, a truth I'd hidden in my past life to keep up appearances. Now I'd use it to my advantage. The crowd's attention shifted, their whispers turning to demands. "Who was with him when he collapsed?" asked Tom Jenkins, a burly farmer with a no-nonsense frown. My eyes locked onto Emma Lane, who hovered at the edge of the field, half hidden behind a stack of hay bales. Her rosy cheeks and sturdy frame betrayed her. She'd been eating the meals I'd brought for Brian, the ones I'd starved myself to provide. In my past life, Emma had played the victim, letting the crowd pressure me into saving Brian, then weeping to him about their true love stolen by me. She'd spent years poisoning my marriage, crying to Brian about if not in this life, then in the next, while I scrubbed floors and nursed his mother. Now I'd turn her own game against her. "Emma was with him," I said, pointing directly at her. "She was helping him with the farm work when he collapsed." The crowd's heads swiveled, their eyes pinning Emma like a spotlight. Her face flushed crimson, her hands waving frantically. I can't do it," she stammered. "I'm not feeling well either," but her excuse fell flat. The townsfolk, hungry for action, closed in, their voices rising. "You were right there," Emma called Sarah Miller, a seamstress with a sharp tongue. "Don't just stand there, save him." Emma's eyes darted to me, a mix of panic and resentment. I met her gaze, my expression calm but unyielding. In my past life, I'd been too naive to see her manipulations, too desperate to please Brian to question her tears. Now I saw her for what she was, a woman who'd used her charm to keep Brian's heart while letting me bear the burden of his life. My rebirth had given me clarity, and I wouldn't let her slip away this time. "Emma, you're stronger than me," I said, my voice steady. "You've been eating the meals I brought for Brian, right?" A gasp rippled through the crowd, their eyes narrowing as they noticed the contrast between Emma's healthy glow and my gaunt frame. The accusation hung in the air, heavy with truth. Emma's mouth opened, then closed, her cheeks burning. The crowd's pressure intensified, their shouts drowning out her protests. "Do it," Emma yelled Tom. "He'll die if you don't." Her shoulders slumped, defeated, as she knelt beside Brian, her hands shaking as she positioned them on his chest. I watched, my heart pounding, not with guilt, but with a strange, fierce satisfaction. This was justice, Emma, not I would be tied to Brian's fate. As she began CPR, her breath uneven, I turned away, my eyes finding Lucas again. He hadn't moved, his gaze still fixed on me, a silent question in his eyes. I gave him a slight nod, a promise that I meant every word of my proposal. The crowd focused on Emma now, their whispers shifting from me to her. "She's always been sweet on Brian," muttered Mrs. Thompson, her tone laced with suspicion. "Maybe she's the one chasing him." I let their gossip swirl, knowing it would haunt Emma as it had once haunted me. In Willow Creek, public opinion was a weapon I'd wielded carefully today. My past life had taught me the cost of their judgment, 40 years of servitude, a broken heart, a son who despised me. This time I'd rewrite the story, starting with this moment. I'd chosen Lucas, not Brian, and I'd chosen myself. Emma Lane's hands trembled as she pressed them against Brian Walsh's chest, her breath ragged as she performed CPR under the relentless gaze of Willow Creek's townsfolk. The Nebraska cornfield was a stage, the summer sun of 1975 casting harsh light on her flushed face. Jane Harper, stood a few yards away, my heart steady despite the chaos. Reborn with the memories of 40 years of betrayal, I'd orchestrated this moment, refusing to save Brian as I had in my past life. That choice had led to a marriage of misery, with Brian pining for Emma, his high school sweetheart, and his mother Eleanor scorning me as a hick unfit for her son. The cosmic voice that had granted me this second chance, "You deserve another chance," Jane had given me the clarity to see through Emma's manipulations. In my past life, she'd lurked in the shadows, letting the crowd push me into saving Brian, then used her tears to keep his heart while I slaved away. Now I'd turned the tables and Emma was kneeling in the dirt. The crowd's voices were a chorus of pressure, their words sharp and unforgiving. "Come on, Emma, keep going," shouted Tom Jenkins. His arms crossed as he loomed over her. "You were with him all morning. Don't let him die." Emma's eyes flicked to me, a flash of resentment in her gaze, but I held my ground, my face impassive. My body, frail from years of giving my meals to Brian, was proof of my sacrifice Emma had benefited from. The lunches I'd packed, the extra portions I'd gone hungry to provide, had gone to her, not Brian. In my past life, I'd been too naive to notice, too consumed with pleasing him, to question why he always seemed so well fed while I wasted away. The truth was plain, and the townsfolk were beginning to see it too. "Look at Jane," muttered Sarah Miller, her voice carrying over the hum of the crowd. "She's skin and bones, and Emma's got those rosy cheeks. Who's been eating Brian's food?" The accusation hung in the air, and Emma's rhythm faltered, her hands pausing for a split second. "Keep going," barked Mrs. Thompson, her eyes narrowing. Emma's face burned crimson, her breath coming in short gasps as she resumed CPR. She was no longer the delicate sweetheart of Willow Creek. She was a woman caught in her own web, exposed before the town's judgmental eyes. I glanced at Lucas Reed, the co-op foreman who stood at the field's edge, his dark eyes watching the scene quietly. In my past life, I'd feared Lucas mistaking his stern demeanor for disapproval. He was an outsider in Willow Creek, a city boy from Omaha who'd arrived 5 years ago after losing his parents in a tragic accident. He'd taken on the foreman role with a relentless work ethic, his muscular frame and weathered skin a testament to his labor. The townsfolk respected him, but kept their distance, intimidated by his rare words and piercing gaze. I'd been no different, avoiding him during fieldwork, thinking he was judging my efforts. But when I was dying in that trailer abandoned by my son, it was Lucas who'd found me, paid for my care, and sat by my bedside, his rough hands gentle as he promised I'd pull through. He'd built a trucking empire in Omaha, but never married, carrying a silent love for me I'd been too blind to see. Now reborn, I saw him clearly, a man of strength and kindness, the opposite of Brian's selfish charm. Emma's CPR grew more desperate, her shoulders heaving as she pressed harder on Brian's chest. The crowd's pressure was unrelenting, their voices a cacophony of demands. "You're his friend," Emma called a young farmer. "Don't give up." In my past life, this moment had been mine, my hands on Brian's chest, my breath giving him life, only for the town to shame me into marrying him. Emma had stood back her tears, a performance that won Brian's heart while I bore the burden of his life. Now she was trapped in the role she'd forced on me, and I felt no pity. My rebirth had given me not just a second chance, but a fierce clarity. I'd spent 40 years serving a man who clutched Emma's photo as he died, a mother-in-law who despised me, and a son who locked me away. This time I'd choose my own path. Brian coughed, his eyes fluttering open, and the crowd let out a collective gasp. Emma sat back, breathless, her face a mask of exhaustion and embarrassment. She'd saved him, but at a cost. Her reputation was now tied to his, just as mine had been. I stepped back, my boots sinking into the soft earth, my heart light with the justice of it all. Lucas's eyes met mine, a silent question in his gaze. I'd proposed to him moments ago, a bold act that had shocked the town, and his response, "We'll talk later," still hung between us. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no, which was enough for now. Brian stirred, his voice weak but sharp. "Jane Harper, get away from me." He rasped, his eyes wild as they locked onto me. I froze 15 feet away, my heart skipping a beat. His words weren't just confusing, they carried the weight of 40 years, the familiarity of a man who'd lived our marriage. He too was reborn, carrying the memories of our past life. The crowd fell silent, their eyes darting between us. Brian blinked, realizing Emma was beside him, not me. "Emma, you saved me," he said, his arms wrapping around her, but his gaze stayed on me, a mix of shock and desperation. He knew I'd walked away, knew I'd rejected him. "Jane," he said, his voice stronger now, "get me some water and food. I need to get to the clinic." His tone was commanding, as if I were still his servant, the woman who'd cooked and cleaned for decades. Confused by his familiarity, the crowd murmured, but I laughed, a cold, sharp sound that cut through the air. "Ask Emma," I said, my voice clear. "She's the one who saved you. I'm done with you, Brian." The words felt like freedom, each syllable a step away from my past life. The townsfolk's eyes widened, their whispers shifting from judgment to curiosity. They'd never seen me like this, defiant, unshackled. Emma's face twisted, a mix of relief and resentment. She'd saved Brian, but the crowd's gaze was now on her, their questions turning to her motives. "Why was she with him all morning?" muttered Sarah Miller. Maybe she's the one chasing him. I let their words hang, knowing they'd haunt Emma as they'd once haunted me. Lucas stepped closer, his presence a quiet reassurance. You okay? He asked, his voice low and gruff. I nodded, my heart racing not from Brian's demands, but from the possibility of a life with Lucas. I'd chosen him not out of desperation, but because I saw his heart, which had cared for me when no one else did. With Emma kneeling beside Brian and the town's eyes on them, this moment was my victory. I was no longer Willow Creek's dutiful daughter. I was Jane Harper reborn, and I was writing my own story. The Nebraska sun hung low over Willow Creek's cornfields, casting long shadows across the dusty earth. It was the summer of 1975, and I, Jane Harper, stood at the edge of a turning point, my heart steady with the resolve of my reborn life. Moments ago, I'd watched Emma Lane, Brian Walsh's high school sweetheart, reluctantly save him from a heart attack, her hands shaking as she performed CPR under the townsfolk's relentless pressure. In my past life, I'd been the one kneeling in the dirt, saving Brian, only to be shamed into a 40-year marriage that broke me. Reborn with the memories of that betrayal, Brian's obsession with Emma, his mother, Eleanor's scorn, my son Michael's abandonment, I'd refused to repeat my mistakes. The cosmic voice that had granted me this second chance whispering, "You deserve another chance, Jane," as I died in a trailer, fueled my defiance. I'd proposed to Lucas Reed, the co-op foreman, shocking the town and choosing a new path. Brian's eyes fluttered open, his coughs weak but growing stronger. The crowd's murmurs hushed their gazes fixed on him as Emma sat back, her face flushed with exhaustion and embarrassment. I stood 15 feet away, my thin frame trembling from hunger, but my spirit unyielding. In my past life, I'd poured my life into serving Brian, cooking his meals, mending his clothes, nursing his mother, only for him to die clutching Emma's photo. My son, swayed by Brian's lies about my scheming nature, had locked me in a trailer to starve. Now I'd shifted the burden to Emma, letting her face the town's judgment. But as Brian stirred, his voice cut through the air, sharp and jarring. "Jane Harper, get away from me," he rasped, his eyes wild as they locked onto me. The crowd froze, their whispers silenced by his outburst. His words weren't just confusing, they carried the weight of 40 years, the familiarity of a man who'd lived our marriage. My heart skipped a beat as I realized the truth. Brian was reborn too, carrying the memories of our past life. He blinked, his gaze shifting to Emma beside him, and his expression faltered. "Emma, you saved me," he said, his arms wrapping around her, but his eyes stayed on me, a mix of shock and desperation. He knew I'd walked away and rejected the role I'd played for decades. The townsfolk exchanged glances, confused by his familiarity with me. "What's he talking about?" muttered Tom Jenkins, his brow furrowed. Jane didn't do anything. I stood my ground, my boots rooted in the soft earth as Brian's voice grew stronger. He demanded Jane get me some water, his tone commanding, as if I were still his servant. "And food. I need to get to the clinic. Hurry up." The crowd's murmurs returned, a low hum of shock and disapproval. In my past life, I'd have scurried to obey, desperate to please him despite my hunger. I laughed, a cold, sharp sound that cut through the humid air. "Ask Emma," I said, my voice clear and unyielding. "She's the one who saved you. I'm done with you, Brian." The words were a release, each syllable a step away from the 40 years of servitude, the nights spent crying alone, the mother I'd left behind. The crowd's eyes widened, their whispers shifting from judgment to curiosity. "Jane's not taking his nonsense," Sarah Miller muttered, her tone laced with surprise. "Good for her." Brian's face twisted, a mix of confusion and anger. "Jane, you can't just—" he started, but I cut him off, my voice rising for all to hear. I said, "You don't get to tell me what to do anymore," my heart pounding with the thrill of defiance. "You lived your life pining for Emma, treating me like a maid. I gave you everything, my youth, my health, my mother's time, and you gave me nothing but betrayal. I'm not your servant in this life." The crowd fell silent, their gazes darting between me, Brian, and Emma. Emma's face burned, her hands clenched at her sides. She'd saved Brian, but now she was tied to him just as I'd been in my past life. The irony was bitter and sweet. I glanced at Lucas, who stood at the field's edge, his dark eyes watching me with quiet intensity. I'd feared him in my past life, mistaking his stern demeanor for criticism. I'd learned too late that he'd loved me silently, watching over me during field work, slipping extra rations into my basket. When I was dying, abandoned by Michael, Lucas had paid for my hospital bills, his rough voice promising I'd be okay. His presence reminded me of the life I could choose, a life of mutual respect, not servitude. My proposal to him shocked the town, and his response, "We'll talk later," was still hanging between us, a promise of something new. Brian struggled to sit up, his eyes locked on me, a flicker of recognition in his gaze. He knew I was reborn, knew I remembered every moment of our miserable marriage. "Jane," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading, "you don't understand. We can fix this. You and me." I shook my head, cutting him off. "There's no you and me, Brian. There never was. You loved Emma, and now you have her. Live with it." I turned my boots crunching against the earth and walked toward Lucas. The crowd parted their whispers following me, but I didn't care. Willow Creek's judgment had trapped me once. This time I'd use it to my advantage. Emma's voice broke the silence, shrill and defensive. "Jane, how dare you act so high and mighty? You've always been, after Brian." Her accusation was weak, undermined by her own guilt. The crowd's eyes turned to her, their murmurs shifting. "She's the one who was with him," said Tom Jenkins. "Maybe she's the one chasing him." I let their words hang, knowing they'd haunt Emma as they'd haunted me. Lucas stepped closer, his presence a quiet anchor. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice low and gruff. I nodded, my heart racing with the possibility of a future I'd never dared dream of in my past life. I was Jane Harper reborn, and I was done being anyone's fool. The Willow Creek Co-op buzzed with activity as the sun climbed higher, its heat wrapping the Nebraska fields in a hazy glow. It was late afternoon in the summer of 1975, and I, Jane Harper, felt the weight of my reborn life settling into my bones. Hours ago, I'd walked away from Brian Walsh's collapse, leaving Emma Lane to save him under the townsfolk's pressure. My refusal to repeat my past life's mistake, saving Brian, marrying him, enduring 40 years of betrayal, had shocked Willow Creek. In front of everyone, I'd proposed to Lucas Reed, the co-op foreman, choosing a man whose quiet strength I'd overlooked in my past life. The cosmic voice that had granted me this second chance whispering, "You deserve another chance, Jane," as I died in a trailer, still echoed in my mind, urging me to build a life of love, not duty. I trudged through the cornfields, my body aching from hunger and the morning's chaos. In my past life, I'd spent decades serving Brian, cooking his meals, nursing his mother Eleanor, and scrimping to send our son Michael to college. Brian had died, clutching Emma's photo, Eleanor had called me a hick, and Michael, swayed by their lies, had locked me in a trailer to starve. Now reborn, I was determined to keep my mother Mary close and to choose a partner who saw me as an equal. Lucas was that man. In my past life, I'd feared his stern demeanor, avoiding his piercing gaze during fieldwork. But when I was dying, he'd found me paid for my care and sat by my bedside, his rough hands gentle. He'd built a trucking empire in Omaha, but never married, carrying a silent love for me I'd been too blind to see. I found Lucas harvesting wheat in my assigned plot in a distant field. His broad shoulders hunched under the sun, his dark weathered skin glistening with sweat. He was an outsider in Willow Creek, a city boy from Omaha who'd arrived 5 years ago after his parents died in a car accident. He'd taken on the foreman role with a relentless work ethic, earning respect but keeping his distance. The townsfolk whispered about his seriousness, his rare smiles, but I saw the truth now. His intensity hid a heart that cared deeply. "Lucas," I called softly, approaching with a bottle of water and a worn towel. "You don't have to do my work. I can manage." He straightened, his dark eyes meeting mine, a flicker of surprise in his gaze. "You look tired," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "Didn't want you fainting out here." His words were simple, but they carried a weight I'd missed in my past life. He'd always watched over me, slipping extra rations into my basket, checking my work without a word. I handed him the water, my fingers brushing his. "Thank you," I said, my voice catching. "You've always been kind to me, even when I didn't see it." Lucas took the water, his eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to read me. "You're different today," he said, his tone cautious. "Proposing like that, walking away from Brian, what's going on, Jane?" I hesitated, my heart racing. I couldn't tell him about my rebirth, the cosmic voice, the 40 years of pain. But I could be honest about my feelings. "In the past, I was a fool," I said, my voice low. "I gave everything to someone who didn't care, lost time with my mom, and lost myself. I'm done with that. I see you, Lucas, your strength, your heart. I meant what I said about marrying you. I want a life where I'm caught, not used." His jaw tightened, a flush creeping up his neck. He wasn't used to such words, not in Willow Creek, where emotions were buried under hard labor and small-town pride. In 1975, rural Nebraska was a place of tradition where men proposed and women waited, where dreams of city life were whispered but rarely chased. The post-Vietnam years had left communities like ours struggling with young people itching to move to cities like Omaha as farming co-ops faced economic strain. With his city roots and quiet ambition, Lucas was an anomaly, a man who could have left but stayed building a life here. I saw now what I'd missed. He'd stayed in part for me. I picked up the towel, my hands trembling slightly. "You're sweating," I said, stepping closer to wipe his brow. His muscles tensed under my touch, his breath hitching. I drew back, startled by the moment's intensity, but smiled a small, genuine smile. I said, "You're too good to me, Lucas," my voice soft but playful. His eyes widened, a rare flush spreading across his face. I've got work," he stammered, turning abruptly. "Please don't overdo it out here. I'll check on you later." He strode off his steps quick, but I caught the glance he threw over his shoulder, a mix of confusion and warmth. I watched him go, my heart racing with a feeling I hadn't known in my past life, a flutter of hope, of possibility. In 40 years with Brian, I'd never felt this, never known the thrill of being seen. But a shadow fell across my path as I returned to the field. Brian stood there, his face pale, but his eyes burning with anger and desperation. "Jane," he said, his voice low, "we need to talk. I know you're reborn too. You can't just walk away from me. You made my life hell last time. I'm choosing Emma this time, so I don't have any ideas." His words were a punch, confirming his rebirth and his shameless entitlement. I'd have crumbled in my past life, desperate to appease him. Now I stood tall, my voice cold. "I don't want you, Brian. I never did in this life. Be with Emma. She's your choice now." His face twisted, but before he could speak, Emma appeared, her eyes flashing with anger. "Jane, stop pestering him," she snapped. "Everyone knows you're obsessed with him." I laughed loud enough for the nearby workers to hear. "You two came to me," I said, my voice carrying. "I'm working here, not chasing anyone. If you've got a problem, take it up with each other." The workers paused, their eyes on us, and I saw the shift in their gazes, doubt creeping into their view of Emma and Brian. I turned, my heart light with the power of my defiance. Lucas's figure was still visible in the distance, a reminder of the life I was building. I was Jane Harper reborn, and I was choosing myself. Choosing Lucas, choosing a future where love meant more than duty. The Willow Creek diner, Rosie's, was a hub of clatter and chatter, its checkered linoleum floors scuffed from years of farmers' boots. It was late afternoon in the summer of 1975, and I, Jane Harper, stood behind the counter pouring coffee with hands that still trembled from the day's events. Hours ago, I'd walked away from Brian Walsh's collapse in the cornfield, leaving Emma Lane to save him under the townsfolk's pressure. In front of everyone, I'd proposed to Lucas Reed, the co-op foreman, a bold act that had shocked Willow Creek and marked my break from a past life of betrayal. In that life, I'd served Brian for 40 years, nursing his mother Eleanor and scrimping for our son Michael, only to be abandoned by them all. Reborn with the memories of that pain, guided by a cosmic voice that whispered, "You deserve another chance, Jane." As I died in a trailer, I was determined to rewrite my story. Brian, also reborn, had demanded my help as if I were still his servant, but I'd rejected him, shifting the town's scrutiny onto Emma. As the diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, I felt the weight of my new life settling in. Willow Creek was a small town in 1975, Nebraska, caught in the post-Vietnam economic slump where farming co-ops struggled and young people dreamed of city jobs in Omaha. The diner was my lifeline, its meager wages funding my survival, but it was also a stage for the town's gossip. As I wiped down the counter, the door's bell jingled, and Brian strode in, his face pale but his eyes burning with purpose. Emma trailed behind, her rosy cheeks flushed with agitation. The diner's patrons, farmers, shopkeepers, and a few teenagers glanced up, sensing trouble. Jane, Brian said, his voice low but sharp, leaning across the counter. "We need to talk. I know you're reborn too. You can't just walk away from me. You made my last life hell, chasing me, forcing me into marriage. I'm choosing Emma this time, so stay out of my way." His words were a slap, his entitlement unchanged despite our shared rebirth. I'd have crumbled in my past life, desperate to appease him. I'd cooked his meals, cleaned his home, and nursed Eleanor only for him to die clutching Emma's photo. Michael, swayed by Brian's lies about my scheming, had locked me in a trailer to die. Now I stood tall, my voice cold. "I don't want you, Brian. I never did in this life. You chose Emma, be with her. Please leave me alone. His eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, Emma stepped forward, her voice shrill. Jane, stop pestering him. Everyone knows you're obsessed with him, trailing after him like a lost puppy. Her accusation was weak, undercut by her own guilt. She'd eaten the meals I'd brought for Brian, leaving me starving. I laughed, loud enough for the diner to hear. I said, you two came to me, my voice carrying over the clink of coffee cups. I'm working here, not chasing anyone. Look around, you're the ones following me. The patrons' heads turned, their murmurs shifting from curiosity to doubt. She's got a point, muttered old man Jenkins, sipping his coffee. Emma's always hanging around Brian. Emma's face reddened, her hands clenching. You're twisting this, Jane, she snapped. You've always been jealous of me. I set down the coffee pot, my eyes locked on hers. Jealous, I went hungry to feed Brian, and you ate every bite. You saved him today, congratulations. He's your problem now. The diner went quiet, the weight of my words sinking in. In my past life, I'd let Emma's tears and the town's gossip trap me in a marriage to Brian. I was using their tactics against them, turning the town's judgment on Emma. The door's bell jingled again, and Lucas Reed stepped inside, his broad frame filling the doorway. His dark eyes scanned the scene, landing on me with a quiet intensity. I'd feared him in my past life, mistaking his stern demeanor for judgment. I'd learned too late that he'd loved me silently, watching over me during fieldwork, paying for my hospital bills when Michael abandoned me. He'd come to Willow Creek after losing his parents in a car accident, taking on the foreman role with a work ethic that intimidated the town. Now his presence reminded me of my chosen life, a life of mutual respect, not servitude. My proposal to him shocked the city, and his response, "We'll talk later," lingered, a promise of something real. Brian's eyes flicked to Lucas, a flash of jealousy crossing his face. Jane, you're making a mistake, he said, his voice low. Can you just run to him? You'll regret this. I stepped out from behind the counter, my heart pounding with defiance. The only mistake I made was wasting 40 years on you, I said loud enough for the diner to hear. I cooked, cleaned, and starved for you, Brian. You gave me nothing but betrayal. I'm done. Play house with Emma. The patrons' eyes widened, their whispers buzzing. She's not wrong, said Sarah Miller, a seamstress, her voice carrying. Brian's been stringing them both along. Emma's face twisted, her voice rising. Jane, you're being ridiculous. Brian and I are together now. Stay out of our way. But her words lacked conviction, and the diner's patrons were no longer on her side. I turned to Lucas, who stood by the door, his jaw tight. I said, Lucas, I'm taking my break, grabbing my apron and walking toward him. Brian called after me, Jane, you can't just walk away. But I didn't look back. The diner's murmurs followed me, but they were different now, less judgmental, more intrigued. I'd turned the tables, and Willow Creek was starting to see Brian and Emma for what they were. As I reached Lucas, he gave a slight nod, his eyes warm with unspoken support. I was reborn as Jane Harper and rewriting my story one defiant step at a time. The Nebraska sky turned pink as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft glow over Willow Creek's dusty streets. It was evening in the summer of 1975, and I, Jane Harper, stood outside Rosie's diner, my heart racing from the confrontation with Brian Walsh and Emma Lane. I'd just rebuked them in front of the town, turning their accusations back on them and walking out with Lucas Reed, the co-op foreman I'd proposed to earlier that day. Reborn with the memories of a 40-year marriage to Brian, a life of servitude, betrayal, and abandonment, I was determined to choose differently. The cosmic voice that had granted me this second chance whispering, "You deserve another chance, Jane," as I died in a trailer, fueled my resolve. I'd rejected Brian's demands, exposed Emma's manipulations, and chosen Lucas, a man whose quiet strength I'd overlooked in my past life. Lucas stood beside me under an old oak tree, his broad frame silhouetted against the fading light. His dark eyes, usually stern, held a flicker of concern as he looked at me. You okay, Jane? He asked, his voice gruff but gentle. I'd feared him in my past life, mistaking his intensity for judgment. He'd come to Willow Creek after losing his parents in a car accident, taking on the foreman role at 20, his work ethic earning respect, but few friends. I'd learned too late that he'd loved me silently, watching over me during fieldwork, slipping extra rations into my basket. When my son Michael abandoned me, it was Lucas who'd found me, paid for my hospital bills, and sat by my bedside, his rough hands gentle. Now his presence was a lifeline, a reminder of the life I could build. I shook my head, tears prickling my eyes. Lucas, do you think I'm crazy for proposing like that? I asked, my voice trembling. I just, I can't go back to who I was. He frowned, his hands clenching at his sides. You're not crazy, he said, his tone firm. But you're different today. Walking away from Brian, talking to me like that, what's happening? His words were cautious, but there was a warmth beneath them, a curiosity that made my heart ache. I took a deep breath, and the Nebraska air cooled against my skin. I couldn't tell him about my rebirth, the cosmic voice, the 40 years of pain. But I could be honest about my heart. In the past, I was a fool, I said, my voice low. I gave everything to someone who didn't care. My time, my health, my mom. I lost her, Lucas. I left her alone here while I followed Brian to Omaha, thinking it was my duty. She visited once, and Brian and his mother treated her like dirt. I only saw her 4 times in 40 years, and I didn't even get to say goodbye when she died. My voice cracked, tears spilling down my cheeks. I'm done with that life. I propose to you because I see your kindness and strength. I'm scared, but I want to be someone who chooses herself and love. Lucas's eyes softened, a rare vulnerability breaking through his stern facade. Jane, he said, his voice rough, I've seen you work yourself to the bone for Brian, never complaining even when you were starving. I stayed in Willow Creek because I couldn't leave you behind. I never said anything, thought you'd never look at me. But today you did. His words hit me like a wave, washing away the last of my doubts. In my past life, I'd been too blind to see his care, too consumed with pleasing Brian. I saw him clearly, a man who'd chosen me when I had nothing. I wiped my tears, my heart racing with fear and hope. Lucas, I meant every word. I'm not a city girl. I'm not educated, but I know how to live a good life. I can learn, I can care for you, for your family. If you'll have me, I'll be a good wife. My face burned, but I held his gaze, refusing to look away. In 1975, Nebraska women didn't propose or speak so boldly. The post-Vietnam years had left rural towns like Willow Creek struggling with young people dreaming of city jobs and college opportunities that felt out of reach. My proposal was a defiance of tradition, a declaration of my new self. Lucas scratched the back of his neck, a nervous gesture that made him seem younger, less imposing. You're sure about this? He asked, his voice low. I'm not an easy man, Jane. I work hard and I don't talk much. But I'd take care of you. His words were simple, but carried a promise Brian had never offered. I nodded, my throat tight. I'm sure I said, a small smile breaking through my tears. I want this, Lucas. I want us. He gave a slight nod, his eyes burning with a quiet intensity. Then we'll figure it out, he said, his voice gruff but warm. But you don't have to face Brian and Emma alone. I'm here. His words were a vow, a promise of partnership that made my heart soar. In my past life, I'd faced the town's gossip alone, bearing the weight of Brian's betrayal and Eleanor's scorn. I had Lucas, and the thought filled me with a strength I'd never known. As we stood under the oak tree, the diner's lights glowing behind us, I heard footsteps. Brian and Emma approached, their faces a mix of anger and desperation. Jane, you can't keep doing this, Brian said, his voice low. You're making a fool of yourself running to him. Emma chimed in, her tone shrill. You're just jealous, Jane. Brian and I are together. Accept it. I turned, my voice cold. I've accepted it, Emma. You two deserve each other. Stay out of my life. The words were final, a closing of the door on my past. Lucas stepped closer, his presence a silent shield, and I knew I was no longer alone. I was reborn as Jane Harper, building a life where love meant more than sacrifice. The Willow Creek town hall glowed under strings of bare bulbs, their soft light casting a warm haze over the folding tables draped in checkered cloths. It was a crisp evening in the summer of 1975, and I, Jane Harper, stood at the center of a bustling wedding banquet, my hand clasped tightly in Lucas Reed's. Days ago, I'd proposed to him in a cornfield, shocking the town and breaking free from the shadow of my past life. In that life, I'd served Brian Walsh for 40 years, cooking his meals, nursing his mother Eleanor, and scrimping for our son Michael, only to be betrayed by them all. Reborn with the memories of that pain, guided by a cosmic voice that whispered, You deserve another chance, Jane, as I died in a trailer, I'd chosen Lucas, the co-op foreman who'd loved me silently. My bold proposal had sparked whispers, but Lucas, true to his word, had organized this grand wedding to silence them, declaring our commitment to all of Willow Creek. The hall was packed with townsfolk, farmers, shopkeepers, and diner regulars sipping lemonade and nibbling cornbread. Their eyes followed us, a mix of curiosity and grudging respect. In 1975 in Nebraska, where the post-Vietnam economic slump weighed heavily on rural towns, weddings were rare moments of joy, a chance to forget the struggling co-ops and dreams of city life in Omaha. Lucas, an outsider coming to Willow Creek after losing his parents, earned the town's respect with his relentless work ethic. But his stern demeanor and rare smiles kept most at a distance. I'd feared him in my past life, mistaking his intensity for judgment. I'd learned too late that he'd watched over me, slipping extra rations into my basket, paying for my hospital bills when Michael abandoned me. Now, as his wife, I saw the man behind the stoic facade, a man who'd stayed in Willow Creek in part for me. Lucas led me from table to table, his rough hands steady in mine, his dark eyes warm with pride. "This is Jane, my wife," he said gruffly to each group, his voice cutting through the chatter. The word wife sent a thrill through me, starkly contrasting the hollow title I'd held with Brian. In my past life, marriage had meant servitude, cooking, cleaning, and enduring Eleanor's scorn as a small-town hick. I'd left my mother Mary alone in Willow Creek, visiting her only 4 times in 40 years, while Brian and Eleanor treated her with disdain. Now Mary sat at the front table, her weathered face beaming with a smile I hadn't seen in decades. I'd vowed to keep her close in this life, and Lucas had promised to welcome her into our home, a promise Brian never made. The townsfolk's whispers had shifted since the cornfield incident where I'd refused to save Brian, leaving Emma Lane to perform CPR. My public rebuke of Brian and Emma in Rosie's diner had turned their accusations back on them, and Willow Creek was starting to see their true colors. As we passed her table, Jane's got spine murmured, "Sarah Miller, the seamstress. Never thought she'd stand up to Brian like that." I smiled, my heart light. In my past life, the town's gossip had trapped me, shaming me into marrying Brian after I saved him. Their judgment was turning, and Lucas's public commitment was sealing it. At the far end of the hall, I spotted Brian lurking in the shadows, a whiskey bottle in hand. His eyes, bloodshot and wild, followed me, a mix of envy and desperation. In my past life, he'd died clutching Emma's photo, his heart never mine. Reborn, he'd demanded my help as if I were still his servant, but I'd rejected him, exposing his entitlement. Now his presence at my wedding felt like a ghost from that past life, a reminder of the pain I'd left behind. Lucas's grip tightened, his gaze flicking to Brian. "Ignore him," he muttered, his voice low. "He's got no claim on you." I nodded, my heart swelling with gratitude. Lucas wasn't just my husband, he was my partner, a man who saw me as an equal, not a servant. As we reached Mary's table, she stood, her arms open. I fell into her embrace, tears prickling my eyes. "I'm so proud of you, Jane," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You found a good man." I'd failed her in my past life, leaving her alone while I chased Brian's approval. Now I'd keep her close, no matter where life took us. Lucas stood beside me, his hand resting lightly on my back, a silent vow of support. The music, a lively fiddle tune, swelled, and the townsfolk clapped their cheers, drowning out the last of the whispers. For the first time, I felt free, unburdened by the town's judgment or Brian's shadow. I was Jane Harper reborn, and this wedding was my declaration of a new life built on love and strength. But as the night wore on, I caught Brian stumbling toward the exit, his bottle empty, his face twisted with anguish. He'd tried to make a scene, muttering about his Jane, but Lucas's friends, burly farmers from the co-op, had quietly escorted him out. The town's eyes were on us now, not him, and their approval felt like a victory. I leaned into Lucas, his warmth grounding me, and knew I'd made the right choice. With its gossip and traditions, Willow Creek could no longer hold me back. I was building a future with Lucas and Mary by my side, and nothing, not Brian, Emma, or the past, could take that away. The Willow Creek Hospital smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, its fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow over the linoleum floors. It was a week after my wedding to Lucas Reed in the summer of 1975, and I, Jane Harper, stood outside Brian Walsh's hospital room, my heart steady but heavy. Brian had been hospitalized after a drunken fall at our wedding banquet, where he'd lurked in the shadows downing whiskey as he watched me with Lucas. In my past life, I'd served Brian for 40 years, cooking his meals, nursing his mother Eleanor, and sacrificing my health for our son Michael, only to be betrayed. Reborn with those memories, guided by a cosmic voice that whispered, "You deserve another chance, Jane." As I died in a trailer, I'd chosen Lucas, the co-op foreman who'd loved me silently. My public rejection of Brian and Emma Lane had turned Willow Creek's gossip against them, and our wedding had sealed my new path. But Brian's fall had sparked rumors that Lucas's friends had roughed him up, threatening our chance to return to Omaha, a dream for many in rural Nebraska's struggling economy. I'd come to the hospital to ensure Brian wouldn't press charges, protecting Lucas's future. As I approached his room, I overheard raised voices, Brian and Emma arguing. "You keep saying you love me," Emma shouted, her voice shrill, "but you're obsessed with Jane. She's married Brian to someone who can get her to the city. That's all she wants, a ticket out. You're just a tool to her like you are to me." Her words were a revelation, exposing her true motives. In my past life, Emma had manipulated Brian with tears, claiming I'd stolen their love while I slaved away. Now her mask was slipping. Brian's voice was low, broken. "She loves me, Emma. She's just mad. You don't understand." Emma scoffed, her tone sharp. "Get real, Brian. I married you to get to Omaha. I only saved you because the town forced me. If you mess up our return eligibility with this hospital stunt, I'll never forgive you." Her words hung heavy, and I froze my hand on the door. Emma's admission confirmed what I'd suspected. She'd used Brian just as he'd used me. The door swung open and Emma stormed out, her eyes meeting mine for a fleeting moment. She glared but said nothing, shoving past me and disappearing down the hall. I stepped inside, my heart calm despite the tension. Brian lay in the hospital bed, his face pale with a bandage on his forehead. His eyes, dark and sunken, shimmered with unshed tears as he saw me. "Jane," he said, his voice hoarse, "I was wrong. I thought Emma loved me. I thought you married me to get to the city. I'm sorry." His words were a shock, but I felt no sympathy. In my past life, I'd given him everything, my youth, my health, my mother's time, only for him to die clutching Emma's photo. Michael, swayed by Brian's lies, had locked me in a trailer to die. Now Brian's regret was too late. "Stop, Brian," I said, my voice cold. "Even if I had married you for the city, I still served you for 40 years. I cooked, cleaned, starved for you, and you gave me nothing but coldness. You blamed me for stealing your true love, but your choice was to treat me like a servant. This has nothing to do with Emma." His face froze, his mouth opening, but no words coming out. I pressed on, my voice steady. "I'm here about your hospitalization. Don't drag Lucas into this. If you cause trouble, you'll lose your chance to return to Omaha for at least a year. Why make it worse for yourself?" Brian's eyes darted away, his hands clenching the bedsheet. "So you're here for him," he said, his voice bitter. "You used to only have eyes for me." I stood, my patience gone. "That was my mistake," I said. "I'm not that Jane anymore. You have advantages, use them. Get to Omaha, live your life, but stay out of mine." I turned to leave, but Brian lunged forward, grabbing my wrist. "Jane, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "I know I was wrong. Divorce Lucas. Come back to me. I don't care what you did with him. I can't live without you." His grip was tight, his eyes wild with desperation. I shook him off, my heart cold. "You've lost your mind, Brian," I said. "I'm married to Lucas and I love him. He loves me, something you never did. Have you forgotten how you treated me? Who would walk back into that hell?" He flinched, but his voice rose, trembling. "I can change, Jane. I swear in this life I'll treat you right. We can have our son again. Think of Michael, our son. If you don't come back, he'll never exist." His words hit like a punch, the mention of Michael sending a shiver down my spine. In my past life, Michael had been my world. I'd worked grueling shifts to send him to college, dreaming he'd lift us out of poverty. But Brian's lies that I was selfish, manipulative, pushing Michael to study for my own gain had turned him against me. When Brian died, Michael blamed me, locking me in that trailer to die. Now Brian dared to use him to manipulate me. "You don't know what Michael did?" I said, my voice low and sharp. "He hated me because of you. He locked me away, left me to starve. Don't you dare use him to guilt me." Brian's face paled, his mouth opening in disbelief. "No, that's impossible," he mumbled, his voice breaking. "It can't be true." "Leave the past behind, Brian," I said, my voice final. "In this life, we're done." I walked out, his gaze burning into my back, but I didn't look back. Days later, I heard from Tom Jenkins that Brian had changed his story, claiming his fall was an accident, not an assault by Lucas's friends. Our return to Omaha was safe, and I felt a weight lifted. Lucas was waiting outside the hospital, his dark eyes warm as he took my hand. He said you didn't need to face him alone, his voice gruff. I smiled, leaning into him. "I know. But I had to end it myself." In 1975, in Nebraska, where dreams of city life were a beacon, I built a future with Lucas, with Mary by my side, free from the ghosts of my past life. I was Jane Harper, reborn, and I was finally whole. The Omaha skyline shimmered under the Nebraska sun, a modest cluster of brick buildings and smokestacks that felt like a world away from Willow Creek's endless cornfields. It was the spring of 1976, and I, Jane Harper, stood on the porch of our new home, a small but sturdy house with a freshly painted white fence. Less than a year ago, I'd been reborn, my past life's 40 years of betrayal, serving Brian Walsh, nursing his mother Eleanor, and sacrificing for our son Michael, etched into my memory, guided by a cosmic voice that whispered, "You deserve another chance, Jane." As I died in a trailer, I'd chosen a new path, marrying Lucas Reed, the co-op foreman who'd loved me silently. My public rejection of Brian and Emma Lane, coupled with our wedding, had turned Willow Creek's gossip against them, securing our move to Omaha. Standing in this bustling city, I felt the weight of my past life lifting, replaced by a future I'd never dared dream of. The move to Omaha was part of a broader wave sweeping rural America in the mid-1970s. The post-Vietnam economic slump had hit farming communities like Willow Creek hard, with co-ops struggling and young people yearning for city jobs. The government had eased restrictions, allowing families to relocate, and rumors of reinstated college entrance exams sparked hope for a generation stifled by rural life. Lucas and I had seized the opportunity, filing our paperwork with the help of Tom Jenkins, a co-op leader who'd witnessed my stand against Brian. Unlike my past life, where I'd left my mother Mary alone in Willow Creek, visiting her only 4 times in 40 years, I'd insisted she come with us. Lucas had driven back to Willow Creek, loading Mary's few belongings into his truck and bringing her to our new home. Now her laughter filled the house, a sound I'd missed for decades, as she tended a small garden in the backyard. Our life in Omaha was a stark contrast to the drudgery of my past. Lucas started a small trucking business with his relentless work ethic, leveraging his experience as Willow Creek's foreman. I'd drawn on memories from my past life, snippets of market trends and economic shifts I'd overheard in Brian's city circles to guide him. When he hesitated to invest in refrigerated trucks, I recalled the boom in frozen food distribution in the 1980s and urged him to take the risk. His business flourished, and our modest savings grew into stability. Lucas's stern demeanor softened in the city, his dark eyes lighting up with pride as he showed me his first delivery contract. "You're smarter than you let on, Jane," he'd say, his voice gruff but warm, and I'd smile, knowing I'd finally found a partner who valued me. I too was chasing a dream I'd abandoned in my past life. The reinstatement of college entrance exams in 1976 opened doors I'd thought closed forever. In Willow Creek, I'd been a diner waitress, my education limited to a high school diploma earned between shifts. Now I studied late into the night, poring over math and science books by lamplight, determined to become a doctor. My past life's memories of hospitals, of my own illness, fueled my ambition. I wanted to save lives, to be the person I'd needed when Michael left me to die. Lucas supported me, brewing coffee and quizzing me on biology terms, his rough hands gentle as he turned the pages of my textbooks. "You're going to be a college girl," he'd say, his rare smile lighting up our small kitchen. In the fall of 1976, I gave birth to our daughter Lily, a bright-eyed girl with Lucas's dark eyes and my stubborn streak. Holding her, I felt a joy I'd never known with Michael, whose love had been poisoned by Brian's lies. Mary doted on Lily, sewing tiny dresses and singing lullabies I hadn't heard since childhood. In my past life, I'd lost Mary to distance and neglect, visiting her only 4 times while Brian and Eleanor scorned her. Now she was part of our family, her presence a healing balm. Lucas too embraced her, calling her Ma and fixing her garden trellis with the same care he showed me. Our home was filled with love, starkly contrasting to the cold, empty house I'd shared with Brian. But the past wasn't entirely gone. Word reached us through old Willow Creek friends who said that Brian and Emma had moved to Omaha and their marriage was strained. Brian had clung to Emma after I rejected him, but her admission in the hospital that she'd married him for a city permit had cracked their bond. They'd filed their marriage papers shortly after my wedding to Lucas, but the rumors hinted at constant arguments. I felt no pity for Brian, who'd died clutching Emma's photo in my past life, nor for Emma, who'd manipulated him while I slaved away. I focused on our life, Lucas's growing business, my studies, Lily's giggles, and Mary's garden. Omaha was our fresh start with its promise of opportunity, and I was determined to make it count. One evening, as I rocked Lily to sleep, Lucas sat beside me, his hand resting on mine. "You ever think about Willow Creek?" he asked, his voice low. I shook my head, smiling. "Only to remember why I left." This is our life now, Lucas, yours, mine, Lily's, and Ma's. He nodded, his eyes warm. Good, because I'm not letting you go. His words were a vow, a promise of the partnership I'd never had with Brian. In 1975 in Nebraska, I'd been reborn to rewrite my story, and in Omaha, I was doing just that, building a life of love and purpose, free from the ghosts of my past. The Omaha hospital buzzed with the quiet efficiency of a spring afternoon in 1991, its sterile halls a far cry from Willow Creek's dusty fields. Jane Harper, now 38, stood in a white coat, a stethoscope draped around my neck, as the chief physician at one of the city's top hospitals. 15 years had passed since my rebirth when a cosmic voice whispered, "You deserve another chance, Jane," as I died in a trailer burdened by 40 years of betrayal. In that past life, I'd served Brian Walsh, nursed his mother Eleanor, and sacrificed for our son Michael, only to be abandoned. Reborn in 1975, I'd chosen Lucas Reed, the co-op foreman, who'd loved me silently, rejecting Brian and Emma Lane to build a new life. Now in Omaha, I'd become a doctor, my dream fueled by memories of my past life's pain. Lucas's trucking empire thrived. Our daughter Lily was a vibrant 14-year-old, and my mother Mary lived with us, her garden a testament to our family's love. That day, as I reviewed patient charts, a familiar figure appeared in the waiting room, Brian Walsh pushing Eleanor in a wheelchair. He looked worn, his hair graying, his shoulders stooped, a shadow of the charming man I'd married in my past life. Eleanor, frail and confused, was a stark contrast to the sharp-tongued woman who'd called me a hick. Brian's eyes, red with emotion, locked onto me. "Jane," he said, his voice hoarse, "I need to talk to you." My heart stayed calm, the pain of my past life, a distant memory. In 1991, Omaha was thriving, its economy bolstered by new industries, a far cry from the struggling rural towns of the 1970s. My life had flourished here while Brian's had faltered. Brian said, "I've started my own company," his words tumbling out. "I'm rich now, Jane. I still love you. Please come back to me. I've waited 15 years. You've had enough of Lucas by now, haven't you? No one knows you like I do. No one loves you more." His voice cracked, desperate, but I felt only pity. In my past life, he'd died clutching Emma's photo, treating me with coldness while I slaved away. Reborn, he'd begged me to return using our son Michael to guilt me, not knowing Michael had locked me in a trailer to die. I'd rejected him then, and now his plea was a hollow echo. I glanced at Eleanor, her eyes vacant, her body a testament to neglect. In my past life, I'd nursed her for 8 years, enduring her scorn. Without me, she'd deteriorated, a reminder of the life I'd escaped. "Brian," I said, my voice steady, "you're wrong. There's someone who loves me more, who knows me better." At that moment, Lucas appeared, his tall, strong frame filling the doorway. His hair was graying, but his dark eyes still burned with the same intensity that had drawn me in 1975. He'd come to pick me up after my shift, a habit he'd kept for years. "This is my husband, Lucas Reed," I said, smiling brightly. "He's the love of my life, and every day I love him more than the day before." Brian's face crumpled, his hands trembling as he gripped Eleanor's wheelchair. "Jane, please," he whispered, but I shook my head, leaning into Lucas's arm. "Live your life, Brian," I said. "Mine is here." Lucas's hand tightened on mine, his stern face softening with a smile. As we turned to leave, he muttered, "That guy's gonna keep bothering you. I could hire a bodyguard." I laughed, the sound light and free under Omaha's golden sun. "No need," I said. "He's in the past. You're my future." "By the way, isn't Lily coming home tonight?" "Let's go out for dinner, your treat." Lucas chuckled, his eyes warm. "You said you love me more every day. I feel the same." We walked away, hand in hand, our lives a tapestry of love, hard work, and triumph. Lily was thriving, her laughter echoing Mary's, who still tended her garden at 70. My career as a physician was fulfilling, saving lives as I'd vowed. Lucas's business employed dozens, a cornerstone of Omaha's economy. Through old Willow Creek friends, I'd learned Emma had remarried a wealthy businessman chasing status in Omaha's social scene. Still, her letters to mutual acquaintances hinted at regret, her life a hollow performance. Brian, now single, had faded into obscurity, his company struggling, his obsession with me a weight he couldn't shed. In 1975, I'd been reborn to rewrite my story, leaving behind a marriage of servitude, a mother-in-law's scorn, and a son's betrayal. The cosmic voice had given me a chance to choose love, and I'd chosen Lucas, Mary, and Lily. As we drove home, Omaha's skyline fading into dusk, I knew this life was my greatest blessing. I was Jane Harper reborn, and I was home.